Hello, very beautiful community. I'm coming through late today for health reasons. But I wanted to talk to you about the MAGA civil war. But not by getting into the details of Trump attacking Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and them replying to him, but into a bigger picture perspective of what it means for conditions for Trump-style politics to obtain, while it being at the same time true that each instantiation of Trump-style politics is implosive. Now, Trump-style politics is feelings politics. And by feelings politics, I mean that it's politics which has to necessarily evacuate thought out of it. That's how the resonances in that relationship between the MAGA folks and their god, Trump, work. And because thought is necessarily evacuated out of these resonances, it's also psychotic politics. And psychotic politics is politics for human beings who can't bear reality, who find truth oppressive of their agency. And therefore they have to destroy the world in their heads in order to bear it in practice. And that's why this morning on Substack I quoted the psychoanalyst Christopher Bolas, who said that MAGA discourse is a form of literature. And there are very important consequences that stem from that for the way we oppose it. Because there is still a tendency among most commentators to think of MAGA discourse as based on intellectual error, right? These are voters who are underinformed or stupid or foolish, and also perhaps somehow morally degenerated. And that's not the case, because feelings politics is not politics that's the politics of thought gone badly. It's politics that evacuates thought. Trying to unmask MAGA with argument and empirical observation and fact is a bit like trying to fact check a novel, right? It's a bit like making an objection to fictional character because they're not real. So what you need to do instead is ask, what's it mean in practice to take these people and pull them back from the brink of psychotic politics into something more manageable? You're not going to pull them back into, a hunky-dory positive sentiment about their institutions. But what you could do is pull them back into, if you like, more manageable political sentiments, so that they go from finding institutions opaque, incomprehensible, unintelligible, to kind of being able to make sense of them, but still feeling that they are deprioritized, powerless, betrayed, unsafe. And then you can manage these feelings. Now, how do you manage them? You manage them by understanding that yes, they're pathological, but they're also produced by particular political forces. And so you try to challenge these political forces, these social forces, right? We've, of course, briefly talked about all of them, but that would mean taking on the social reality of economic deprioritization, the social reality of the loss of dignity in labor, the social reality of the way our discourse is transformed by the post-truth polarization of the internet, the reality in which various ideologies of self-realization lead to strange hyperactive identity politics and make sure that we lose focus on values like solidarity and the public good and patriotism of a constructive kind, sustained democracy, right? And if you are going to do that, it has to come in the form of a national project that says, these are the things that technocratic centrist politics over the last few decades got wrong, and this is what we're going to do about it now. And that national project has to speak in a language of populism while remaining committed to institutions. It has to be firm on immigration, but non-exclusionary. It has to elevate minorities without falling into identitarianism, and it has to center the values of patriotism, solidarity, and the public good. And only a national project of that kind can begin bringing people back from the brink of psychotic politics into other kinds of less nihilistic and more manageable discontent, other kinds of sentiments of distrust. And that's why we always say on the channels that moving from the 3 to the 4th type of distrust is always a very special kind of corrosive collapse. So it goes unsafety, feeling your political institutions aren't keeping you safe because they're incompetent, let's say, to it goes from unsafety to the deeper kind of distrust, which is this sense of powerlessness. There's nothing you can do to inflect the political and economic forces in which you're forced to swim about. Then the third, slightly more corrosive kind of distrust is the distrust of feeling betrayed, and that's bad because you then begin to feel that your political representatives aren't just your opponents but your enemies, and therefore they're evil. And that's already bad, but we haven't experienced this collapse into a post-truth politics of feelings yet. That happens when the 4th stage comes in and people come to feel that politics is opaque and intelligible, that it doesn't make sense, and they stop dealing in cause and effect. And then you've basically lost the game and you have to get it back. And that doesn't sound like it's terribly ambitious, but you actually need to be very, 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 very ambitious to return people to more manageable kinds of distrust from the more corrosive and nihilistic kinds of distrust. But let's circle back to where we started. Psychotic politics of feelings are politics that generate projects that implode and don't sustain themselves. But that's still compatible with it being the case, and in fact it makes it more determinately the case that the conditions for a politics of feelings still obtain, even though particular instantiations of that kind of politics collapse. And that's, I know I'm speaking to us like we're 7 years old, but that's difficult to keep in mind because we tend to think Trump's doing badly, therefore goody. But Trump doing badly is goody in some ways because it gives the Democrats a bigger chance to defeat him, so that's good. But the problem is that tendentiously, authoritarians tend to fail towards success. And they don't fail towards success by authoritarian A failing and then succeeding politically. They fail to success because authoritarian A fails, is brushed aside, but the calamity he has caused generates an even deeper context for authoritarianism to flourish, and then another authoritarian comes along. And so that's the way in which the worse they perform, in some ways, the deeper the conditions for authoritarianism are sustained and determined. And so that's a very difficult cycle which we need to break. And that's why you shouldn't jump up too giddily every time something calamitous happens to Trump, because what you have to watch for is this broader pattern, right? And so I'm afraid if I'm this sort of mold inspector coming to the house and looking at the walls, it's a very clear mold problem, and it's very clear that not enough remedies are being generated. So the conditions for psychotic politics sustain, but particular instantiations of psychotic politics are going to be political projects that don't sustain well and keep collapsing until something happens. And I think that that's something we should reasonably expect in the 2030s. And that's going to be a situation when a lot of people who have done a politics of feeling begin to return to the politics of thought, but do so more, even more destructively than before. Now, of course, in principle, a politics of feeling, returning to a politics where feeling is still primary, but it is connected with thought, that is a good thing, right? That's how you get people from more to less corrosive forms of distrust. But the trouble is that the default trajectory for us is that reconnection of feeling with thought will lead to more systematic presentations from irresponsible politicians in the 2030s, more systematic plans that are going to be more properly followed through, and so on. So that it's going to be less buffoonish and less calamitous kind of authoritarian politics that will begin taking people stuck in the politics of feelings out of it. They're going to be thinking much more in terms of cause and effect, but they're going to be thinking in terms of cause and effect in a more divisive, in a more destructive, in a more anti-democratic, in a more exclusionary way. And we're going to have to challenge that, and we're going to have to channel as many of these people as they come out of the politics of feelings into a constructive rather than a destructive reconnection, right, with thought. And we do that via getting as close as we can to, electing and inspiring politicians who have what I've called this national project, a comprehensive vision for the future of the country that begins to restore trust without breaking institutions, and by taking responsibility for some of the policy mistakes of technocratic liberalism over the decades that have come before. Lots of love, and talk very soon. Well, talk very, very soon, because we're probably going to be talking about Hungary in the next 24, 48 hours. Lots of love.